So welcome. There's a lot of people who I think have not been to a Nomas Projects event before, and so welcome to this. We've been online really since COVID, and it's actually working quite well for us because people can come from all over the UK and sometimes internationally as well. So really glad you can join us this afternoon. My name's Cully. I'm an artist. I'm based in Dundee. I'm one of the directors of a charity called Morphe Arts, and I'm also one of the people behind Nomas Projects. And the other is Owen Daly, who is an artist. He's a tutor at Dundee College, but it's his wife's 50th this weekend, and they've gone away. So I thought that was a good enough reason to let him not be here. For those that don't know, Nomas is situated on Ward Road in Dundee. It's between a nightclub, which used to be a church. It's called the Church Nightclub. Very interesting, very original. And the Balcony Bar, which you can get. I think it's the cheapest pints in Dundee. That's the context of where we are. It consists of 5 office windows, and we use these windows to display artworks. And the name Nomas derives from the root word nomad. It means roaming in search of pasture. And for Owen and I, when we were looking for a name, this was something that really resonated with our need as humans generally. And artists particularly, who are constantly seeking inspiration. And our aim has always been to offer an opportunity to investigate the role of art in society, to engage with ideas, to learn from the experiences of others, and hopefully to be part of a relevant conversation in the arts in Dundee and beyond. And it's an absolute delight to be working with Zannah Cooper, who is a textile artist. She's based in London. I first met Zannah when she was a student. She'd come to ECA, Edinburgh College of Art, and my memory of it was that you weren't really enjoying it. I think you maybe were interested in tapestry. They had a tapestry department at ECA, but it was, I think traditionally it was, actual tapestry. And I think when Zannah got there, it just wasn't really that. And I think that was your kind of hope. And I think within the year you had left ECA and had moved to study textiles at Bath Art School. And that's where you graduated. And interestingly, I only met Zannah for that short time at ECA, but our paths have crossed lots of times in that time. And actually, for a period, Zannah worked for Morphe Arts as well, supporting recent graduates. And we've just kept in touch over the years. But I've been particularly captivated by Zannah's work as an artist, working in the context of prison. And it's this work in particular that aligns with Nomas's theme for this year is artworks or artists who are working with kind of social justice and responding to issues of social justice. And just what Zannah was doing, when I chatted to her, I thought this would be a good fit. And the more we chatted and what she's showing, it's just been an absolute perfect fit for Nomas. Zannah in her statement says she's motivated by the power of art to help individuals understand themselves as well as heal and build communities. So Zannah she studied at Central St Martin's. She got her MFA from Central St Martin's, and then she worked. I think it was the design at Central St Martin's. She focused on ways to improve the well-being of vulnerable populations and volunteers at Her Majesty's Prison, Tameside. I'm saying Her Majesty's Prison because it was when Zannah was there. And that was with St Martin's Design Against Crime Research Centre. And Zannah got the job as a textile officer. And she designed a project aimed at reducing violence and increasing empathy, where prisoners made fidget quilts for dementia charities and weighted blankets for children with autism. And then as a side hustle, the prisoners made patchwork cushions and quilts to give out on prison visits for loved ones, and using fabrics that reflected their cultural identities and their personalities. And that's the body of work that is showing at Nomas at the moment. I think Zannah's got photos to show because I'm just looking around the screen and I'm not sure anyone will have seen this work actually in the windows. So we've got some images to show you later. Zannah was, after she'd completed her MA, she was offered to do a PhD, but she was keen to gain more experience working in prisons to understand how to help individuals within a complex and flawed criminal justice system. During COVID, she worked at Her Majesty's Prison Wormwood Scrubs as a health and wellbeing practitioner and set up a prison enterprise, Rise and Bloom, which is an ongoing project. And I think Zannah will explain a bit more about that as well. And she's currently working in the community with ex-offenders struggling with substance misuse, but intends to return to prison to offer creative workshops once again. So there's, it's just a joy. We were chatting with Zannah and I were chatting earlier, and absolutely delighted to have her share the details of all these things with us now. So I'm going to hand over to you, Zannah. I'll let you screen share. And as we normally do, if people have questions as we're going along, put them in the chat and we can come back to that, and we'll open up for discussion at the end. Hand over to you now, Zannah. Let's give her a big welcome. Thanks, Zannah.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Cully, for the warm introduction. And thank you, everyone, for coming. I really appreciate you giving up your Sunday afternoons. The weekends are sacred, so really appreciate that. And it's great to see old faces and new friends. Also, please feel free to ask questions or share comments at the end. I'd love to hear from you. And it's amazing to have friends and family here who have volunteered in prison for many years, who know much more about the criminal justice system than I do. So I feel like it takes a lifetime really to know about this really difficult environment. I'd like to begin by just giving a little bit of a context around how I got into working in prisons. It's just been really great to reconnect with my creativity and remind me of what I most love with this exhibition, because at the moment I don't really have much time to be creative. It's just a real sense of needing to go back into that environment and specifically to make art as well. Many inmates are highly creative. The whole art of crime and creativity involved, is huge. And so it's been a joy working in that environment. So in case any of you are interested, there are 141 prisons in the UK, which is pretty shocking probably for many of you. And there's 122 in England and Wales, 15 in Scotland, and 4 in Northern Ireland. So you might have a clink around your corner, and it's worth just seeing if there are opportunities to volunteer. The photograph in the top corner is of Lady Antry, who set up the charity Find Cell Work. And she said that some of her best times were in prison. You can be pleasantly surprised. So I would recommend. Unfortunately, there have been 10 years of austerity in the whole criminal justice system. So just really underfunded, understaffed. It really, is needing a lot of transformation. Fortunately, though, recently, Lady Dame Black has... there's been a new report which is going to increase the funding for prisons and for ex-offenders, which is really crucial and much needed. These are just a few ways to volunteer. There's an amazing music charity, In-House Records. So when I was at Wormwood Scrubs, got to know the colleagues there working in that capacity. And then you'll probably know about the Kersler Arts Awards as well. and Ai Weiwei is curating the exhibition, which is on currently at the in London. And otherwise, Sycamore Tree, Restorative Justice, there's prison choirs, there's Alpha, fine cell work. You can be a visitor, a listener, you can write to inmates. So lots of different like ways to get involved. So you might kind of wonder like how and why I started in prison, and kind of began with a real love of art and design ever since a young age. Also just a firm belief in the power of creativity to help people, like Khalid said. And also for my aunt who's on the call, who was a real inspiration and has worked or volunteered in prisons for over 20 years and been awarded an MBE this year for that. So I found myself after doing an MA, this is my students here, colleagues from St. Martin's, and we were doing a project which was called Make Right, and basically we were co-designing anti-theft bags with inmates, which was an amazing project and really fun. And Professor Lorraine in the centre, who's blonde, she just had a lot of enthusiasm and passion for getting involved, getting students involved, because so often you don't really know what it's like until you've been into prison to really kind of capture your imagination and kind of get what it's about. So often, yeah, it's, we get like information from films or, series, and it's good just to get in and see what it's like from a first-hand experience. So these are a couple of the fidget quilts that we started making. We were, when I got a job as a textile officer, which is a very funny title that my manager gave me, he just gave us kind of free rein after the bag project, Mate Right. He just said that, yeah, you can do anything that's textiles based that in some ways will reduce violence and increase empathy. And my colleague at the time, and she was American, we just wanted to have a project that was quite small and easy to do. So we started making these fidget or fiddle quilts that are sensory devices that are for Alzheimer's patients, and they're basically something that can be used on when you're like sitting down, and it's just something that's quite comforting for people who are just needing the comfort of textiles, which are often a very kind of perfect for that. We gave, sorry, I've gone a little bit too fast. We gave those fidget quilts to St. Joseph Hospice, where I had volunteered doing an art project. And at one point I was working in prison and then in a hospice, and it just kind of was quite an intense experience, but also amazing being able to design something in one context and then provide it in another. So that was, that was a really amazing opportunity. But in terms of the exhibition right now, this is a visual of one of the cushions that I made, which is using a quote by a prisoner from a juvenile prison. And it just really resonated with me. It's using fabric from Africa here, which is hand block printed and then with hand embroidery. And I think that after listening to the stories and to people's experiences inside, it did start to dawn on me just the difficulties, the challenges that they faced, and that sometimes it's easy from the outside to judge, but without that kind of the knowledge and the understanding of what people really go through. Okie dokie. So this fidget quilt was made by, so this is on display at Dundee, by our peer mentor, who came from a family of tailors, and he just was incredibly talented, and he's made this fidget quilt for an older gentleman, and using beautiful offcuts from a local interior design shop. So we're lucky to get donations from local businesses in prison. And yeah, he could make anything. Often inmates would come in, ask him, to make a pair of trousers, and he was able just to make trousers, shirts, all sorts in prison. So it was great having him as a kind of right-hand man in the studio, and also just a place where inmates could come away from the wings and just that was really kind of like a bit of a haven away from the rather kind of just grim prison environments. They're able to open up, and often when you're using your hands and you're making something, they're more likely to start just chatting to each other and opening up as well, which was really lovely to see that. So here are a couple of the cushions that are currently on display at the moment. These are ones that I've made in response to some of my time in prison. And let me see. Okay, and the next one just here, this is a weighted blanket that was made in prison. So it's filled with poly pellets, each square. And this is, again, for children with autism. And it's just having that weight for some individuals is, again, something that just helps to calm them down. And yeah, the people in the class, they were just happy to be able to give back and contribute, particularly, some of them had children with autism, or they had a nan who had dementia. So it was quite direct for them. It was quite a kind of personal, experience. So they could really relate to that. And this is one of the cushions that an inmate had made, and just reflecting his own personality. And so these are just interior design fabrics, but beautifully chosen, selected, and a real sense of pride as well in their work. And these are just also a few cushions that I had made. And next year, I'm wanting to go back into prison and basically just to provide packs for inmates to make their own cushions to give out on visits. It's something which, to make something that's beautiful and useful that could really just brighten up their family members or a friend's home. So it's just something that often, textiles is quite a domestic but emotive art form. So that's in terms of rebuilding relationships and just reconciliation. So this is something which I'm planning to do next year. Here's a quote of one of the cushions, and it's from a Carl Jung quote. So, of no tree, it is said, can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell. And even though it may seem quite a controversial statement, that sometimes a prison sentence or addiction, a breakdown, could actually be the best thing that happens to someone, could really be the making of them sometimes. If they're able to use and transform their experience and their suffering to understand themselves more, and also to help others heal and to really understand the kind of nature of reality. So often we see these things as a bad thing, but actually it could be the very opposite. And this is just another detail which was inspired by the last Nomas artist. So Lou Davies, your deeds don't define you. And it just, again, really struck, and thought that so often we almost define ourselves by our deeds. And again, so often like a prison sentence might, for some people, they feel like it defines them. And it's just such an unhealthy labeling, and something which, is so good to be able to take off and not allow that to continue to, be to hold you back. And then these quilts here, on the right-hand side, an inmate made this incredible, it's called Lone Star patchwork quilt, from old silk ties that he recycled. And it was just amazing seeing the devotion he poured into it. Sadly, he's not with us anymore. He had tragically had terminal cancer. But being in the class, he was able to, just to have a real sense of purpose while he was processing his future. And it was just really amazing to see the commitment that he had. And in his past life, he had done engineering and construction. And so he was just very good at all the measurements and the kind of the maths involved in textiles. And so that was really moving to have him in the class. And again, this was a piece that was a little bit too big to have on display. It's huge. So I'd love to show it elsewhere at some point. And on the left, I brought in this piece that I had made from old jeans. So just to inspire some of the inmates in the class. And it's using just lots of old pairs of jeans that I cut up. And just also the history of American textiles is such a wealth of tradition there. And it was great to have a colleague who was American. And so, yeah, it's just really positive working with her. And again, this was a little bit too big to have on display. But this is a huge wall hanging that I made when I had COVID. I was working at HMP1 with Scrubs at the time, and we had 30 positive cases on our wing, and my wing was the longest in Europe, so it was huge, and it's pretty intense working there. And we were all going down like flies. It was just a matter of like when you had COVID, pretty much. But this is it's a huge. Almost like a kind of golden moon made up of vermiculite, which is a natural material that I cut into slices with a scalpel and then attached to the surface. And it kind of like unconsciously at the start was just looking at all the shining, the kind of fragments and all of the life and beauty that I'd experienced in prison, and wanting to somehow like remember them, put them back together, and a sense of wanting to kind of repair, but also represent. So often, again, prison itself can have such a bad reputation, but actually it really doesn't have to be that dark or that. It's a lot of light is there, and a lot of life and joy can be had. So it's kind of was a symbol of hope. And this was just a couple of really amazing enterprises that were involved in the criminal justice system. Bounce Back, who do building and plumbing, and then also Switchback is an amazing enterprise that helps ex-offenders get back into work. And then also an Oxford-based project, Newly Ground, and then London Redemption Roasters. And if you didn't know about Cook, they employ ex-offenders and they make amazing frozen food. So I'd also recommend getting some of their delicious food. And again, this is just the Kurzler exhibition just here, which is on currently. And this image, a couple of weeks ago at work, one of the guys I was working with said that he very much felt the criminal justice system was like snakes and ladders. And I just thought it was such a powerful image of so often people say you're almost set up to fail. You're given housing in one borough and then your probation's in another borough. Or the housing department will go home at lunchtime on a Friday and then you're released with nowhere to live that day. And you might be on a script. You have no access to medication, to housing. And again, it just, I felt that more ladders need to be created, solid, sustainable ladders for people to be able to really get their lives back on track. And so, yeah, it just for me was quite an inspiration, a challenge to see how things need to change. Thank you for listening. I'm sure there might be some questions. And I've realized I've kind of slightly gone off my notes. So I'd just spoken a little bit freestyle. But
yeah, that's great, Zannah. I'm sure there will be questions. I've got a few, but I'm just going to look at the chat now. Zannah, do you have any? Just one of the things when I was reading out in the introduction, it says you're motivated by the power of art to help individuals understand themselves as well as heal and build confidence. Like, do you have any stories of people you've worked with where that has been the case?
Yeah, I think that like a lot of the guys who came into the class, some of them pretty hard, like guys who are pretty tough, and then seeing them really soften and become just more human and just more approachable, and starting to open up more was amazing. And so, yeah, I think just some of the toughness kind of falling, away. But also we had one inmate who was gay and he was really bullied, and like other inmates had like stolen his clothes. He didn't have anything to wear. Fortunately, we had like free t-shirts. We were able to give him some more clothes and just real encouragement. And so for him, he was a makeup artisan, hair designer. So I think for him, being in a kind of like textile fashion context was absolutely home. So we had a lot of fun and just a lot of good laughs, really. And so that for him, it was like a bit of a haven in like a, pretty macho environment.
Yeah. How have you felt that? Like, well, interesting, because it sounds like you're working in male prisons as opposed to female. Have you worked in female prisons?
Yeah, I have volunteered. Yeah. Most people find it easier to work in male prisons because usually men they're usually more open to receiving help, whereas women sometimes create their own communities and are a bit, just not as kind of open, really. But it's interesting that so many men are open also to textiles, and subjects are often seen as a bit more like domesticated as well.
Yeah, I know someone that works in Shotts prison. He was part of, I think it was Glasgow Storytelling Centre, and they would go in and he led drama classes as well, and that obviously it's maybe a similar kind of initial reaction, for people to go in and act. But once people engaged with it, it became something they really, really enjoyed and embraced, really, because I would imagine there would be a sense of people reluctant with certain things, like textiles or for instance, in a very, as you were saying, kind of macho environment.
Yeah, I think in a way, though, fortunately with prison, just getting out of your cell is such a, positive thing. And so just that in itself, and also they would be paid. So it's part of the industry's unit. So they would, receive like £2.40 for a session. So at least it was something to get them out of their, their cells. And so, and also, I mean, a lot of the best tailors in the world are men, and so it doesn't have to be necessarily, such a female art form necessarily.
Does anyone have any questions? If you want to just unmute and ask, there's nothing in the chat yet, but if anyone wants to just unmute and ask, that would be great.
I was writing one, but I'll just ask it because it's so much.
Thanks, Donna.
So yeah, you didn't say so much about Rise and Bloom, and I was just wondering, do you have any sort of future plans to continue that project and to take that further?
Yeah, so just to give a bit of context. So I at the moment work in the community, so for Turning Point, so a substance misuse charity, wanting to get more experience working with ex-offenders just to understand the whole system from more of a 360 point of view. But it's more a matter of time, and it's just been really difficult to do that whilst working full time. And so, but that's where my heart is. So I'd like to do that and launch that. But I've learned so much more working in the community, interestingly, because the problem about prison so often is it's actually very controlled, very artificial, and very, in some ways you're always getting, the story from one kind of point of view. But now working with women, working with domestic violence, working with sex work and that kind of thing, it's been incredibly sobering. But then also understanding a lot more about why people are actually in prison, and the whole so it's been really helpful doing that.
Can you explain what Rise and Bloom is, Zannah, for people who don't know?
Yeah, so I set up a social enterprise during COVID, which was rather ambitious, but it's an enterprise to provide cooking and baking workshops in prison, to teach inmates how to make healthy meals, and also as a way of bonding with family members, and then to link them up with social enterprises on the outside when they're released. So giving them a cooking qualification whilst in prison, and then a link to various jobs on the outside, and then continuing mentoring as well for them when they come out. Often it's very scary to come out into the real world, and we have quite a few people who purposely, particularly at this time of year, will commit crimes just to be in prison because it's safe and it's less chaotic than their normal lives. So the kind of challenge comes when they're released often.
Are you working with others with Rise and Bloom? You obviously set it up. Do you have volunteers? Do you have a space, where people can come to?
Yeah, so it will be all based initially in prison. So at the moment, it's I've got a couple of possible prisons where it could be launched in, but at the moment, just because of working Monday to Friday, I don't have the capacity to start things. So with the new year, I'm keen to start part-time and then actually start being able to do projects. That's where I'm really the most interested.
There's a question here from Anna, I presume. She's just saying that she really enjoyed your talk and about the work that you do. And she's just asking if you have any books or podcasts that you could recommend for someone wanting to learn more about the role of the arts in prison.
Yes, absolutely. That's a great question. Ear Hustle is a brilliant podcast. It's set in American prisons, but it's really entertaining, and it's a brilliant, a good listen. The episodes are reasonably short and sweet, and I'd really recommend that. Otherwise, there are, the recent series Time on, is a really great series to watch. And in terms of books, Redemption is an incredible book by an inmate who got a world record for rowing while serving a sentence, which that is really incredible. McAvoy is his name. Again, just it was a prison officer who just saw his talent and noticed how quick he was at rowing, and decided to come in his weekend, on his time off, and to time an inmate. And I think it's just inspired a lot of other people doing time, that you can also, win a world record whilst serving your sentence. You can be pretty productive, and you can actually, the structure in prison, if you are able to kind of work with that, you can achieve a lot as well. And, you can complete degrees. You can do all sorts, learn foreign languages, and many other things. So it doesn't have to just be people dossing around. They're able to sometimes actually do a lot.
Yeah, you're you're obviously advocating for people to get involved, in volunteering. When I was younger, my dad had offered to work in prisons, like as a listener. I think that was one of the things on the list. And I remember asking Dad, like, how on earth do you think you'll be able to relate to someone in prison? And he was saying sometimes they just are looking for someone to talk, just a visitor and just to be a listener. And I just wonder, if you, when you started, like now, do you feel much more secure, about going into prison? What got you kind of past that maybe initial hesitation or fear? Did you have that kind of fear to start with?
Yeah, I think that like anything new and just the reputation that it has, like definitely it can be a bit scary at first. And I mean, they do vary a lot, different prisons. And so, some of the more Victorian Dickensian prisons, they can be pretty intimidating. I remember first just walking onto our wing, C wing, and an inmate, like a weapon fell out of his trousers when that was like the first time I walked onto the wing, and you're just like, great. And there would be fights, and there would be, a lot of officers running here and there. And I think being based on the wing, though, was actually really good because you'd actually understand a bit more what prison life was about. But also it is a very controlled environment in terms of their security, their officers. So I think that it's not necessarily always as dangerous as you imagine. There was a teacher at Thameside Prison who said he preferred working in prison because he thought it was safer than working in a city college. That you'll be more likely to get stabbed or shot in a college than in prison. So that was an interesting take.
There's a couple of questions. One from Louise. So Fine Cell, which you mentioned, do needlepoint too. Does anyone do knitting projects, or is this too dangerous? I ask this because I believe some prisoners can sew in their cells if they're considered safe enough. Did you see the FCW exhibition with Tracy Chevalier, author near London a few years back?
Yes. So my aunt actually contributed to the Sleep Quilt by Tracy Chevalier, the writer, an incredible exhibition. And I see that Matthew, your wife, is knitting as well, which is amazing. Really lovely. Yeah, I do think it would be too dangerous. I mean, you can make a weapon out of a pen, out of anything you can. And so just I think they might be a little bit lethal, sadly. So I don't know if that would be, but I think it'd be very therapeutic as well. Unless you could use plastic needles or things, or I mean, even plastic can be molded into a weapon. So I don't know if that would be possible. Yeah.
Just, I think in response to Anna's question, Ben's put in a comment about there's a film called The Wild Horse Redemption by filmmaker John Saritsky, about the horse whisperer training for inmates in the Colorado prison. So someone might be interested in that as well. One thing actually that I heard a talk at Duncan of Jordanstone College of Art and Design in Dundee by Phil Collins, not the drummer Phil Collins, the artist, and he had done projects in prisons, I think really successful projects around music as well. And one of the things that struck me when he was showing that they did this project and, it kind of generated a lot of interest and enthusiasm, brought, I think, about some changes as well. And then, that was it. And he moved on to another project. And I asked him at the time, what, when you see something working, you've gone in as an artist and done a project and you see it working, how does that make you feel when you just, as an artist, move on to the next project? And he responded by saying, well, I am an artist, I'm not a social worker. And I thought that was a really interesting distinction. And I just wondered how you find that, Zannah, because obviously you studied textiles, you did your MA in textiles, you've moved into this particular area. And, I often think with when artists work in community projects and then show the work, it's often, I think we've talked about this before at Nomas, it's often not necessarily as high standard art, because it's not necessarily made by, well, anyway, I know that's all debatable, but I just wonder how you feel about bringing these things together, because you obviously genuinely care for people, but you obviously love art and creating textiles as well. So I just wonder how you combine these two personally.
Yeah, I remember hearing that quote and being really challenged by it, actually. And I think that my problem is that I've been doing too much social work and not enough art, Mm-hmm. And so I think the kind of the best balance in a way is, and I was chatting with a friend in prison who worked with In-House Records, who was a drummer, and both of us just wish that there would be a way to part-time make art and then part-time, music, art, whatever it is, perform part-time to be in prison, facilitating others to make and create and so on. And how often actually that can, your practice can feed, it can go both ways, basically. But I do also, I think, there is a bit of a danger of, particularly like at St. Martin's, kind of launching into prison for a short, 8-week project, and then doing your kind of tourism, as it were, and then going off and having kind of no translation relationship with your life. And so I feel quite strongly that there needs to be projects in prison, but also in the community, so that there's a longevity, and that particularly a lot of people inside haven't had lasting relationships and able to build trust and so on. And so charities like In-House Records are brilliant, because you can begin in prison, and then they have hubs in the community. So in London, they have amazing gigs and ongoing community and support network on the outside. So I think that's kind of one way to do it. But equally, I think that, many artists are highly sensitive individuals. So working in such a difficult environment is really difficult. And particularly if you don't have time and energy to create, that's actually in itself, there's, a problem.
It was one of the things that we talked about really early on, in terms of what are we going to show in Nomas? Is it going to be your work? I was really keen for it to be your work, but also that, you could select work that the prisoners have made as well, just in recognizing that there could be something significant about them having their work displayed, as an artwork in a gallery. Just again back to the question that Anna asked, there's a group in Glasgow called Vox Luminous, VOX Luminous, that work within the prison system, but that includes, and they work as with songwriters. So songwriters will go in and work with prisoners, but they work with the prison guards. We work with people in the academic system as well, within criminal justice, and that's a really, really interesting project as well. And music seems to be, obviously Phil Collins was, music project as well. Kate has sent you a question, Zannah, so I don't know if you're able to check that. I think it was in relation to what we've just been talking about there, about art and community work. Can you see that, Zannah?
Yeah, but art therapists employed in prisons who worked in. So I think that was kind of the problem. So not at Thameside when I was working there wasn't any full-time art therapists. And then during COVID, everything shut down. And so that's why I started working as a wellbeing practitioner, because I still wanted to get more experience in prison. But and again, it was within substance misuse, which was seen as key work. But the literacy in prisons is so low, and so I think that's such a problem in terms of not being able to to read and so on, as a way of being able to just kind of transcend your daily experience. And so that's where like visual arts actually can be incredibly helpful. But again, like a lot of art therapists are more freelance, and so it kind of depends on the prisons and on the governors. And it does kind of seem that the private prisons, that is different to the public sector as well. And often private prisons just have more money and more funding and resources and so on. And so they're able to do, a bit more. But yes, it's something, again, that would be brilliant if they had full-time art therapists. I think that would be, and music therapists, drama therapists permanently based there, a number of people. That would be brilliant.
Yeah, it was interesting that you were the textiles officer, given that title. And obviously there was the role, that was a specific role then.
Yeah, and because it was, I think, being a private prison and having also an incredibly pushy and ballsy professor at St. Martin's who kind of stormed her way into prison. Otherwise, it can be really difficult working. I think that's the problem, is so often it's, harder to work in prison than it is to commit a crime. So you have to, so often people who kind of do this work, you have to be a bit crazy and passionate. Otherwise, you're never really going to be able to continue, in such a challenging sector.
Yeah. So Kate has messaged just to say about the second part of the question. I haven't seen the question, Zannah, so can you see that message that Kate sent you?
Sorry, the direct message. Let me see. I don't know. Kate, do you mind? I can't actually see the message directly to myself. Do you mind asking it?
Kate, can you just ask the question, Kate? Yeah.
Yes, I'll do that. Okay.
Thank you.
Just let me find my question. Okay. So the first part, I was just curious because I used to work as an art therapist. So it was good that you clarified that you were actually working in the private sector, which, as I know, is very, very different. So the second bit of my question was also, how do you think your practice is significantly different from that of an art therapist?
I think, partly because I'm not trained in psychotherapy, and I have been trying to work out whether I need to be, because I'm working with the most traumatized people and not having the skills, not having that background, and just feeling like absolutely out of my depth. And so, the difference is very much with design, particularly with the project we're doing with St. Martin's. It was very much like design thinking and looking at problem solving. So it was, and people love that because, again, they love to problem solve. It's seen as something that, could be more masculine, like in some ways, even though that's a bit of a stereotype. But there were, always like a sense of a project, a purpose. And so it was, I think that was kind of a bit different to, to art therapy. But I kind of would subtly try to integrate more of a therapeutic approach in terms of if they were making a cushion of why did you choose these colors and why do you, asking them, what they kind of, their choices represented.
Can I just interject there? Because that's not what art therapists do.
Okay.
But I would just like to say, I think the difference is it's art as therapy. Mm-hmm. So in that sense, if you stick to that you're an artist and you're going in there to help them create something that will have an effect of one sort or another on them, on you, on the system, then that is significantly different to working as an art therapist. I would also disagree entirely with you about your generalization about working with women in an art context, because I've worked in, with very hard to reach and hard to work with groups, mainly women. So I think it's a huge generalization you made. So just as a point of discussion.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Yeah, at the moment, I've got quite a lot of female clients who I've built great rapport with and who I'm sending to rehabs, and I love working with them, and it's going really well. Just that within the criminal justice system, sometimes they can be a bit more protective and a bit create their own communities and slightly more threatened.
I think different issues, just different issues.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think, Kate? Do you think it requires a different way to work?
No, I don't. Not as a creative person. No, as not with the work that Zannah does. No, I think. I mean, there aren't as many women in private prisons, and I mean, I think we need this sort of work needs to go on in state prisons, and. It's a kind of luxury to work in a private prison, although they're all private prisons these days, aren't they? So I know about, some people will use people, art therapists or creative practitioners, but I mean, they won't create posts. So I would advise you, unless you actually want to be an art therapist, not to bother training for one, because there's hardly any jobs, especially with cutbacks, and it's an expensive course to do as well. No, I don't, Cully. I think it's creative art in any form is it's kind of nothing to do with gender.
Yeah,
it might address gender issues, but I mean, you could argue similarly. Well, textiles is a very domestic thing, and maybe if you're going to use stereotypes, women are more domestic on the whole than men are, but that's a huge stereotype which I wouldn't use anymore.
Yeah, and I think that quite a lot of women actually didn't want to sew because they were patronised by that stereotype, and so
there's that issue as well. Yes, but I mean, it can also be very liberating if you showed them work by Tracy Emin and other artists that have used a lot of sewing and in a fine art form, so you could introduce that at the same time, and then that kind of I'm not sure what I'm going to say here, but I think you know what I mean.
Yeah. No, it's good. It's good to bring that up, Kate, at that point. I mean, I think that's probably.
Well, Louise Bourgeois, look at her work. She did lots of sewing in her work. So to bring in, fine art practitioners to introduce people that you're working with to them, as well as them doing their own work, it doesn't need to involve reading because they're all pictures.
Yeah. Does anyone have any other questions? It's just 5:00 now, so I just want to give opportunity. If anyone has any other questions, you can just unmute and ask. Yes, Ben.
Zannah, I've got a bit of a question that's specifically more about your own research and practice for your own self, and sort of, I guess, getting into the headspace of understanding trauma and, I guess, the roots of trauma and the consequences of trauma, and how, like, what are you drawing from? Like, what kind of writings? You mentioned Jung earlier. What kind of writings are you drawing from for your own kind of getting your head around things? And I just wondered if you'd considered or have already been reading any theology, particularly around the area of the Odyssey. That Jung quote kind of brought up in my mind John Hick's soul-making theodicy. And I don't know if you'd come across that.
I haven't, but thank you for the recommendation and for the question. Don't know if you've read the book, The Body Keeps the Score. That's a brilliant one to start with, but also When the Body Says No, which is another. And I think that this is just an example how like kintsugi as a practice, mending gold. And I think that, or also the Leonard Cohen quote of the cracks, it's where the light, gets in. And so I feel that, and I've talked quite a lot to Donna about this as well, but it's so often when we are broken and really experience that and kind of accept that actually we're in sometimes a better, stronger place, and that's where we can really be transformed, and that that's a kind of can be the start of healing. I think it was Brené Brown who talks about it doesn't have to be a breakdown, it can be a breakthrough. And just the very process of making or creating, that in itself, I think, can be incredibly healing. Just even doodling as well. But I'm struck by the number of poets and painters who have made art, like Mary Oliver. She would write while she walked, and so being in nature as an environment of healing itself, and allowing, I think, things like The Artist's Way, I think, is an incredible book by Julia Cameron and a project. And so, the morning pages is also an opportunity to consolidate your thoughts and feelings, and then to, make art. I think my main problem just is not having enough time to make art at the moment, not having a studio. And I think that in itself is it's a real problem, because if you're a creative person, you don't have those outlets and can feel quite kind of blocked, I just very much recommend like Julia Cameron and the idea of like nurturing the artist, nurturing that creative spirit, and looking at kind of, sometimes we can be these emaciated creatives, who need to really take our kind of creativity seriously and know that if there's a gift that's been given to us, then there's something, almost a responsibility to use it. I just felt when I first graduated from art school, I was super happy and lucky to make quite a lot of money and sell pieces of work for a lot, but I just never felt very satisfied. I felt quite lonely and isolated doing that, and just also felt that I loved being creative, and for me I always was the happiest like making art, and wanted to share that experience with other people, and often with people who are hurting the most, and so I think it kind of came from that position. If that kind of answers some of your questions, hopefully.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I thought that was a great answer, Zannah. Even just to have that depth of thought. That was a great question as well, Ben. Thanks. Well, I'm going to wrap things up there, unless anyone has a last question, because I'm aware I've been having a bit of a conversation with Zannah, but yeah, just a last chance if anyone wants to. I think one of the things I'm encouraged about, Zannah, is, or almost a bit frightened about, just going back to you asking for volunteers and the conversation that we had there with Kate, and that kind of idea of going in and knowing what you're doing, and I think it's easy to to be put off, with if you're not already an expert, and actually, obviously you initially as someone inexperienced, and I think there's something to be said, something I really respect in that, that rather than not doing it, is that you go in and learn within that context. And obviously, I would imagine, a steep learning curve. I know it would be for me if I went into prisons, so I really respect the fact that you're doing that, and also just kind of want to encourage others, if you're, not to be put off by not being the expert. If there's an opportunity to go in and help with projects that are already there, as Zannah's listed. I'm just going to screen share one thing. Owen's not here, as I said, and he normally does our kind of outro and lets people know what's going on. Can you see this here?
Yeah, that's great.
Into full screen. Yeah. So this is a space that Nomas has. The 5 posters emulate our windows, 5 windows. And this is just opposite the train station. You come out of the train station. If you turn left, you get to the V&A. If you turn right, if you turn left, you get into town. If you turn right, you get to the V&A. And this is our space here. And this was an exhibition that we showed. It was the images that we showed in Nomas with Ruth and Naomi Floyd last year. And we showed it again as part of Black History Month. It's called Still Here. And the talk for that is now available on our website. So if you're interested in hearing that, then that's available now on our website. And then Zannah's show is on until the 30th of November. And so if you want to come and see that, if you're, if you just fancy a wee wander up from London or Newcastle or wherever you are, you can also visit the V&A as well. It's quite nice. And then in December, we're going to work with other artists from LA who are doing a project with around this kind of theme of immigration, and the timing really just hasn't worked to do that in December. And so I was wondering what we're going to do, and I don't know why I decided to do this, because I'm giving myself a lot of work. But basically, I've invited 25 artists, each to make a piece. This is artists who have never shown at Nomas before, to make a piece that will be added almost like as an Advent throughout December, as part of Advent. And one piece will be revealed each day through Advent. So yeah, I've given myself a huge administrative task there. Ben's holding his head at the thought of that. But that's what's coming up in December. So thank you everyone for coming. Zannah, thank you very much. Let's just show our appreciation to Zannah, if we can, maybe unmute, and it's lots of silent clapping there, Zannah. Hope you're feeling that.
Thanks so much, everyone, for coming. Really appreciate it. And yeah, I think that exactly that thing of just being, in a place and being a presence is sometimes the most important thing, and you really don't have to be an expert at all.
Yeah. Zannah, thank you. And thanks everyone for coming today. Oh, someone going to say something?
I was going to add a comment. I'm Romanian.
Yes.
And years ago, maybe 20 years ago, we got through church the name of somebody who was a Jew serving life in a Romanian prison, but became a Christian. So a few sisters from church, a few ladies from church went and visited him, and he was doing needlework. He was probably allowed to do needlework in a safe place. And I sort of got to know him from just my mum visiting and other people. And then later on, a journalist published a book, which was a selection of these people serving life stories, how they got there, who they were. And him just musing how easily it could have been him, the compiler of all these stories. And I think, yes, of course, doing anything with your hands is therapeutic, and bringing people together, just chatting, just opening up, relaxing, that's good. But for us who are nothing to do with the prison world, it's important to know who these people are, not to just write them off as, oh, well, they went to prison, because they are human, they're there, and they need to be loved. And I guess having their work on display makes us think, oh, so there's all these people. There's a book by, I think, Michael Morpurgo, and it's about somebody in a refugee camp. But it's important for artists to just bring these people and make them visible again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And it could be done with all sorts of art, I guess. But yeah.
Thanks so much.
Iona,
Can I just second this? This is Caroline speaking. I don't know whether you can hear me.
we can hear you, Caroline. Yes.
Yes, and we'd love you to go to the Cursler exhibition, because that is at the South Bank, if anybody can get there, in London at the moment. And it was such a brilliant talk, Zannah. I'm hugely proud of you. And it was just marvellous to really highlight the needs of how we need to work with people in prison and not dismiss them. And I loved your last comment of the previous lady. So thank you so much. Mm-hmm. And if anybody hasn't read Chris Atkins' book, A Bit of a Stretch, I was teaching in Wandsworth at the time and had actually no idea about the traumas of what was going on the wing. And Chris Atkins is a documentary filmmaker, and he found himself the wrong side of the law by mistake, as it were, almost. And his book about life in prison, well, it was in HMP Wandsworth, is just so revealing and really excellent for people to learn more about it. And to think that I was going in teaching and actually didn't see really what was going on. So thank you again for this amazing afternoon. Well, I've just been really fortunate. I think it's just been amazingly wonderful to have worked for the last 20 plus years for Fine Cell work.
Yes.
It's been a huge privilege, and actually just going in and being able to give these men, and we mainly work in men's prisons because there are more men in prison, something creative and something that they can get their heads round or their hands round, and really produce amazing work. I think our HMP Wandsworth quilt, which is now in the Victoria and Albert Museum, was such a triumph, as was a piece of work that we did with Ai Weiwei. So anybody that's interested should look up the Human Touch quilt that we made with Ai Weiwei, and Tracy Chevalier's sleep quilt as well. Anyway, thank you so much. Well done, Zannah.
Yes. I need to say I'm going to wrap up a bit earlier in the future, because that seems to get all the discussion going. Thanks for coming again, everyone, and we'll see you.
Thanks so much. Cheers then.
Bye.
Bye.